Let me tell you about Natalia Radina. She grew up in Belarus and was a journalist for the Charter 97 journal. 2 days after Lukashenko won his fourth term back in 2010, December 19th, 2010, the Belarusian State Security Service, interestingly enough still called the KGB, rounded up all Lukashenko's political opponents, journalists, and protesters, and they were all incarcerated. Everybody at Charter 97 stayed for 15 days. They were pressured and intimidated, but Rodinia stayed much longer. She was isolated in a cold cell. She was given no bed, no toilet. She had limited and only cold water. And this was all in the winter months, remember, December and January. And her head was still hurt from the beating she received when she was arrested. Her ears were almost constantly bleeding. The warden admitted that they were doing it so that I couldn't ever have children. So said Rodinia to Proton Mail in an interview. And she knew that the government would not hesitate to even kill her. In September, only a few months before, her friend had been found dead. The authorities deemed it suicide. But Rodinia looks at the scars in his hands and says, "That's a struggle. He was struggling with someone. That's not suicide." And so she was faced with death. After 2 weeks of this, she was brought before the guards. They threatened her with 5 more years. Think about it. 5 years, day after day, of that horrible, almost torturous place. Or immediate release, if only she would tell on one of the co-founders of the journal that she worked for, and one of Lukashenko's opponents in this last election. As she reported to the Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPG, quote, "It was a very difficult decision. But I realized I cannot live with the thought that I am a traitor. I just made the decision that I'm not going to betray my friends, and I'm not going to betray my supporters. I felt more peaceful about the realization that I could stay in jail for 5 years." Close quote. She was more willing to stay in jail for 5 years than tell on her friends and supporters. That's courage. She was let out for a space of time before trial and escaped then to Russia and then to Lithuania, now to Poland, where I believe she lives today. Hers is an amazing story. So what type of government is Belarus? What government form is it, or does it claim to be? First, let's go over some basic government human forms. Montesquieu, in Spirit of Laws, Book 3, talks about 3 different types of government, and then subsets of that. The first one is a despotic government, one where you act only on your fear. The way the government gets you to do stuff is your fear of something happening to you from them. That's a despotic government in Montesquieu's opinion. Then there's monarchy. This one is based on honor. You do it because you honor the leader, right? So you see him, you want to follow him, he asks you to do this, and so you do it. You're honorable. You follow through on your commitments. And then there's a republic, which is based on virtue. Republics, Montesquieu states, have to be based on virtue. That's the thing that makes them follow the law. The reason they don't need a despotic, fear-based government is because they're virtuous in themselves. The reason they don't need a leader that they honor and respect and follow, though those are helpful, is because they're virtuous in themselves and they know what's right and wrong. So that, Montesquieu says, are the 3 types of governments. Now, which is Belarus? The answer is pretty obvious. Fear-based. It was the fear of being in jail for 5 years that they tried to turn against her. It was the fear of being thrown in prison that they used to deter further journalists and political opponents. But let's look at their Constitution. There's dissonance here. The Constitution, in their preamble, which is really interesting, says, "We, the people of the Republic." We, the people, is, Montesquieu also talks about this, how the people is what makes a republic. In a monarch or a despotic state, it's always one person. And we, the people of the Republic of Belarus, etc., etc. So they claim they are a republic in their constitution, in their preamble. All throughout it, they always say the Republic of Belarus. But it's kind of clear to see that this isn't the case. They claim in the Constitution that they have rights, but this example of the journalist goes directly counter to Section 2, Article 33 in their Constitution. In it, it says everyone is guaranteed freedom of thoughts and beliefs in their free expression. No one shall be forced to express one's beliefs or to deny them. This sounds good. No monopolization of the mass media by the state, public associations, or individual citizens, and no censorship shall be permitted. What were they doing if it wasn't censorship? To pull an entire journal, all the journalists, and throw them in prison for at least 15 days and still claim that that's not counter to the Constitution and that's not censorship? That is the problem with constitutions that don't have checks and balances. Alexander Lukashenko is known as Europe's last dictator, and there are protests going on today. And in the recent weeks past, against him getting reelected again. Here's the thing, the president essentially runs both the legislative and executive branch. They are not separated as they are in America. The president gets to appoint the prime minister of the legislature. The president gets to dissolve parliaments. He gets to call extraordinary sessions for parliament. He gets to call national referenda that he can send out to the people and have them all vote on it if the parliament isn't acting the way he wants them to. He has the right to participate in parliament and any of its bodies, the House of Representatives or the Council of the Republic. He can send back bills that he thinks aren't quite right with his objections, and they either have to pass the bill with those objections or just let the bill die altogether. He gets to issue decrees and orders. He gets to submit laws to be considered. He gets to appoint official representatives of the president, of himself, to participate and be part of Parliament. And if he asks Parliament, then they can give him legislative power. He can ask them, and then if they all vote, then they could just give him legislative power, and then he can make all the laws. They aren't separated, and this is a problem. This is why the Constitution says they're a republic, but they are in actuality a despotic state. And that is the fear of not knowing about, not understanding, and not learning from the Constitution. If we don't know our Constitution, we can't stand up for it now before it becomes this way. And that is why it is so important for every one of us here in America to know our Constitution so that we can protect it from going a path and becoming what something that is entirely counter to what our Constitution claims and supports and upholds.